moment you stop needing people emotionally, your entire presence changes. People can sense it. The desperation disappears. The fear disappears. The constant need for approval dies quietly inside you. And suddenly, the same people who ignored you begin watching you more carefully. Welcome to DarkMind Academy. Most people spend their lives emotionally chained to others. They need validation to feel important, attention to feel worthy, reactions to feel powerful, and because of that, they become controllable. But emotional detachment changes the game completely, because the person who can walk away emotionally without begging, chasing, explaining, or collapsing becomes almost impossible to manipulate. Tonight, you'll understand the dark psychology behind emotional detachment, why it terrifies toxic people, and how silence, control, and emotional discipline quietly place you in a position of power. Because in this world, the one who cares less often controls more. Most people confuse emotional detachment with being cold-hearted. It's not. True emotional detachment is not the inability to feel. It's the ability to feel without surrendering control. Weak people react immediately. Detached people observe first. Weak people panic when ignored. Detached people become quieter. Weak people chase closure. Detached people accept reality and move forward. That difference alone changes how the world treats you. Because humans are naturally drawn toward emotional certainty. They want predictable reactions, predictable emotions, predictable behavior. But when someone becomes emotionally detached, they become difficult to read, and people fear what they cannot predict. That's why emotionally detached individuals often appear intimidating without trying. Not because they're aggressive, but because they're emotionally self-contained. Most manipulation works through emotional hooks: guilt, fear, attention, validation, jealousy, attachment. Manipulators survive by controlling emotional reactions. If someone can make you angry easily, they control your mood. If someone can make you desperate for attention, they control your behavior. If someone can make you afraid of losing them, they control your decisions. But emotional detachment destroys these hooks one by one. Because detached people stop reacting automatically. They stop over-explaining. They stop begging to be understood. They stop proving their value to people committed to misunderstanding them. And that silence becomes psychologically unsettling. Toxic people become uncomfortable when they lose emotional access to you, especially narcissistic personalities, because narcissists depend heavily on emotional influence. They want reactions, positive reactions, negative reactions. It doesn't matter. Attention itself becomes their fuel. That's why emotionally detached people become difficult targets for them. Imagine insulting someone and getting almost nothing back. No emotional explosion. No desperate defense. No panic. Just calm observation. That destroys the manipulator's sense of control. Because emotionally reactive people are easier to guide. Detached people force others into uncertainty, and uncertainty creates psychological discomfort. This is why silence becomes one of the strongest forms of emotional detachment. Most people talk too much when emotional pressure appears. They explain too much, defend too much, reveal too much. But silence removes emotional information. And when people lose access to your emotions, they begin projecting their own fears onto you. That's why silence often feels powerful. Not because silence itself is magical, but because humans fear emotional ambiguity. The less emotionally available you become, the more others start trying to analyze you. Are they angry? Do they care? Did I lose control over them? Why aren't they reacting? And the more emotionally chaotic someone is, the more your detachment unsettles them. This is why emotionally detached people often appear calmer during conflict. Not because they feel nothing, but because they prioritize control over emotional performance. Most arguments are emotional competitions disguised as conversations. People aren't trying to understand each other. They're trying to dominate emotionally. Who becomes louder first? Who loses control first? Who reacts emotionally first? The first person to emotionally collapse usually loses psychological leverage. Detached individuals understand this instinctively. They understand that emotional control changes power dynamics instantly. When someone screams and you remain composed, people subconsciously view you as more dominant, because emotional stability signals strength. Emotional instability signals vulnerability. This is also why emotionally detached people recover from betrayal faster. Not because betrayal doesn't hurt, but because they don't build their identity around other people. Most people emotionally attach their self-worth to external validation, relationships, friendships, attention, approval. So when those things disappear, they psychologically collapse. Detached individuals operate differently. They appreciate people without emotionally depending on them for survival. And that mindset creates resilience. One of the darkest truths about human psychology is that many people only respect boundaries after access is removed. As long as you remain emotionally available no matter how badly you're treated, people assume you'll tolerate anything. But once emotional detachment appears, behavior changes. Suddenly they notice your absence. Suddenly they respect your silence. Suddenly they become cautious. Because humans often value what becomes emotionally unavailable. This doesn't mean playing manipulative games. Real emotional detachment is internal. It's the moment you genuinely stop chasing validation from people who never respected you. And ironically, that's often when people begin chasing you instead. Because desperation repels. Calm emotional independence attracts. Think about the people who appear most psychologically powerful. They rarely overreact emotionally. They rarely beg for attention. They rarely force their presence onto others. Their calmness creates pressure naturally. Because emotional self-control creates mystery, and mystery creates influence. This is why emotional detachment changes your social presence completely. People begin speaking more carefully around you, not because they fear violence, but because they can no longer predict your emotional weaknesses. And prediction is essential for manipulation. The less emotionally predictable you become, the less controllable you become. But emotional detachment has another side most people never talk about: loneliness. Because once you stop emotionally depending on people, you also begin seeing human behavior more clearly. You notice how transactional many relationships are. You notice how some people only appear when they need something. You notice how attention disappears the moment you stop feeding others emotionally. And that realization can feel isolating. But it also becomes freeing, because emotional detachment forces you to confront a brutal reality. Not everyone deserves emotional access to you. Some people only enter your life to consume your energy. Some only stay while they benefit. Some only love the version of you they can control. And emotional detachment helps you recognize that faster. This is why emotionally detached individuals become harder to manipulate through guilt. Manipulators often weaponize guilt to regain emotional control. You've changed. You think you're better now. You don't care anymore. But many times, what they truly mean is, you stopped allowing me emotional control over you. And that shift frustrates people who benefited from your emotional weakness. Because emotionally detached people stop negotiating their self-respect. They stop shrinking themselves to keep others comfortable. They stop sacrificing mental peace just to avoid disappointing people. And once someone reaches that point mentally, Controlling them becomes extremely difficult. But emotional detachment should never become emotional emptiness. Some people misunderstand detachment and become emotionally numb instead. That's dangerous, because suppressing emotions completely eventually destroys genuine connection. True emotional detachment is balance. You care, but not blindly. You love, but without losing yourself. You help people, but without allowing exploitation. You feel emotions, but you don't become enslaved by them. That balance is rare, and rarity creates presence. The strongest people are not emotionless. They simply refuse to let emotions control their decisions. That's the difference, because emotions are temporary, but decisions made during emotional weakness can destroy entire lives. A moment of anger, a moment of desperation, a moment of loneliness. That's all it takes for manipulation to succeed. Detached people understand this. That's why they pause before reacting. That's why they disappear instead of begging. That's why they observe behavior instead of trusting words alone. And over time, this emotional discipline creates psychological strength most people never develop. Because the world trains people to become emotionally dependent. Dependent on praise. Dependent on relationships. Dependent approval. But dependence creates vulnerability. The more someone controls your emotional state, the more power they have over your life. And emotional detachment quietly breaks those chains. This is why emotionally detached people often intimidate emotionally manipulated personalities. Manipulators rely on emotional chaos. Detached individuals bring emotional stillness, and stillness is difficult to control, especially in a world addicted to reactions. Today, social media rewards emotional impulsiveness constantly. Instant outrage, instant validation, instant emotional exposure. People reveal their emotions publicly every second. But emotionally detached individuals move differently. They understand that not every emotion deserves expression. Not every insult deserves a reaction. Not every betrayal deserves revenge. Sometimes the strongest response is emotional silence. And silence forces people to confront themselves. That's why some individuals become obsessed after losing access to emotionally detached people. Because humans naturally crave emotional certainty. When someone walks away calmly, without emotional collapse, it creates unresolved psychological tension. People begin replaying interactions repeatedly. What happened? Why didn't they react? Did they ever care? Why can't I control how they see me? That uncertainty becomes mentally consuming, and the detached person often says nothing at all. That's the power of emotional discipline. Not loud dominance, not aggression. Control. Real power is often quiet. The ability to remain emotionally stable while others lose control around you is rare, and rare psychological traits naturally command attention. But emotional detachment is not built overnight. It usually comes from pain. Betrayal teaches it. Disappointment teaches it. Manipulation teaches it. Loss teaches it. Eventually, some people realize that emotional overinvestment only makes them easier to destroy. So they adapt, not by becoming heartless, but by becoming emotionally selective. And that changes everything. Because once you stop fearing emotional loss, people lose one of their strongest weapons against you. The fear of abandonment weakens. The fear of rejection weakens. The fear of disapproval weakens. And when fear weakens, emotional freedom begins. That freedom changes your energy completely. You stop forcing conversations. You stop chasing people. You stop begging for understanding. You stop trying to save relationships that constantly drain you. And ironically, people often respect you more afterward. Because humans unconsciously admire emotional self-control, even if they don't fully understand it. That's why the calmest person in the room often controls the emotional atmosphere without speaking much. emotion spreads socially. Panic spreads. Anger spreads. Fear spreads. But calmness spreads too. Detached individuals disrupt emotional chaos simply by refusing to emotionally synchronize with it. And that makes them psychologically difficult to influence. At the end of the day, emotional detachment is really about reclaiming ownership over your mind. It's deciding that your peace matters more than constant emotional drama. It's understanding that not every relationship deserves unlimited emotional access to you. It's realizing that silence protects more power than endless explanations ever will. And most importantly, it's learning how to care without surrendering control of yourself. Because the people who master emotional discipline become dangerous in a different way. Not dangerous through violence, dangerous through independence. They cannot be guilt-tripped easily. They cannot be emotionally cornered easily. They cannot be manipulated through approval or rejection as easily. And in a world built on emotional influence, that level of control becomes rare power. Welcome to DarkMind Academy, where silence speaks louder than emotion, and emotional control becomes psychological dominance. If this video changed how you see emotional power, subscribe to DarkMind Academy, and tell me in the comments, do emotionally detached people become stronger, or simply harder to reach?